This is your economic review. You're watching Metropole Television. Let's look at where we stand in terms of wheat farming in the country before we introduce the story that we have for you today. All right, let's cross over to the average wheat prices paid to farmers has been on a rise in the country all the way from 2017 to 2019 as well, crossing over to the next data point that's going to elicit the information that we have for you this morning. Value of wheat imported, despite the prices paid, the value also keeps on increasing all the way to where we are from 2017 to 2019 as well, crossing over to the next part of that data point as well. In terms of quantity imported, also a general increasing trend all the way from 2017 to 2019 as well, crossing over to what we have in terms of the quantity of imported and milled wheat as well. We did have that shortfall in 2018, but again, then we went into a bigger jump in 2019, representing what is also a general trend when you look at the average of imported and milled wheat into the country. Now, a story covered by the Business Daily is warning of impending food insecurity as cereal farmers in the North Rift region, which forms the country's largest producer for wheat, turn to real estate. Agricultural experts in the region are worried that most farmers in the neighboring urban areas are converting agricultural land into commercial spaces, which is seeing a huge decline in acreage under crop production in areas such as Eldoret, Kitale, and Kapsabet. Now, the report states that food security in parts of Rift Valley is under threat for a region that was responsible for the production of 18.6 million bags of maize last year against a target of 24 million bags. Good. Now, to help us talk about this morning and understand the shift, we are joined by Chris Shimba, Policy and Research Specialist, Kenya Markets Trust. Chris, good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, Elijah. How are you?
Happy to have you around. Let's talk about that as well. That despite the dismal performance of the real estate sector in 2020, there seems to be a striking pattern in the North Rift region. Can we attribute this to the effects of devolution, Chris?
Thank you, Elijah. I think we could attribute it to devolution, but there are also a number of things that are also happening.
Yes.
If you look at where we are today, it has been predicted that there is growth of urbanization beyond the just normal devolution which came in as a result of the 2010 constitution. We also have the general movement of many of the Africans now getting into the middle class level. Yes. And as they get to the middle class level, then there is a bit of urbanization that is taking place. And so devolution has only increased what has already started. And this is something that will be seen, and maybe it could be moving faster than we thought for Kenya, simply because of devolution. And we cannot really blame it in terms of devolution, but there are also a bit of demographic changes that are also happening. For example, we have majority of Kenyans are generally youth. But now, because of unemployment cases that are rising in urban centers, the increasing cost of living in urban areas, in towns, now you will find that majority of the youth have found an opportunity now to stay back in their villages. But as they stay back in their villages, then they must also be able to find out what are they going to do. Sometimes they may not be able to do agriculture. They may not be able to do the traditional agriculture as we know it. But they try now to bring in some form of mechanization, some form of new living. And so demand and supply demands that, there is a reaction to that. So by the fact that there are many youths that are now staying in the villages, so the economy is also responding to their stay by now bringing in a number of activities, a number of things that respond to their needs. For example, many now are putting up buildings that, even right in the villages, where the youths can be able to watch football, where the youths can be able to, have some decent housing. And so you see now a bit of commercialization that is taking place. But also this commercialization, one thing that also happens, apart from, devolution, bringing up people who are basically in towns were working in areas that were so developed, but then now they are not able to be in places like Nairobi. We needed to be able to address their needs. So things like recreational activities now are coming up. Recreational activities cannot be done anyhow. They must be done in very good structures, in very good areas, and so part of the agricultural land is now being converted into even recreational activities and to come up with housing, decent housing that can meet the needs of this emerging group of people that were in towns but now are working at the county level. But also we will also account also to devolution in the sense that what devolution has also now done, there is commitment by various county government also to do roads, to do highways, and of course the Kenya National Highways Authority is also doing a number of highways that are connecting county to county. And in that process, again, there is also, part of the ways are being destroyed, So some of the roads, some of the clearance that are being done also take away the agricultural land. Of course, we can say that devolution has contributed to it, but also general urbanization has also contributed to that. And then if you look at also the government Bill 4 agenda, the Bill 4 agenda has also ensuring that some of the agricultural land that were there also paved way some of the government projects like the housing project, talk about the manufacturing. If you are going to transition from agriculture to manufacturing, because most of the manufacturing industries actually benefit from agricultural products, then now you find some of the industries are also coming up within the county levels, within some of the areas that were generally very agricultural rich counties. But allow me also to mention that beyond some of those statistics that we are also putting forward, there are also people who feel that agriculture no longer appeals to them in the context that the previous discussion was just about insurance, issues about collateral, and so you cannot say that because you are a farmer and you are growing crops, then you can be able to take loan based on the crops that you are growing. And so we have now an emerging trend where commercial units are becoming a key aspect, because once you have a title deed for your land, banks are willing to help you build those houses. Banks are willing to use that as a collateral. So people are looking at what else can they do to be able to earn a living. But finally, we also have what our land tenure system is not one of the best. For example, we have what we are calling the land fragmentation. And you see, as people grow up, most of the land in the western region, the basket areas, were inherited, were lands that are inherited. But then as people grow, the demands of the society is that as you grow, you are also allocated your own piece of land. And so given the exposure of knowledge that you have, as the land are being subdivided,
yes,
different groups of people now decide what they want to do with their land. And some of them now goes into commercial building, or some of them become too small for agricultural production.
Yes, Chris, let me catch you there so that I'm going to come back to you on the relevance of wheat farming in the country. If you look at the at the imports that we're making into the country, I mean, from 2017 to 2019, there have been on a rising trend, which therefore begs the question, I mean, when we have an import trend that is always on the increase, then what is there for the local farmers in the country? Just hold on to that. I'm going to come back to you. Let me bring in Arnold Nkisale this morning, who's a microfinance banker. Arnold, let's look at that data on exactly how banks lent to the real estate sector. And if you look at that data that we're posting for you right now, Arnold, you're going to say, yes, despite it being a bit minimal, you can talk about it being on the rise. That despite the view that the banks have to the real estate sector, it has been on the rise. Talk to me about that, Arnold. What is special in the county regions in terms of real estate, and how do banks view real estate in these areas as well, especially when we look at that data in terms of the way they have been lending to them?
Thank you so much. I think for me, I'm looking at it from two perspectives.
Yes.
Number one perspective is agriculture as a contributor to the GDP this is a sector which essentially contributes over 26% to the GDP. And it's a shame that we're in a situation whereby guys are moving from agriculture to real estate. But as Chris alluded to, it's partly because of devolution of the government and also devolution of other sectors like the education sector, whereby you find a situation whereby there is that demand. When there's a devolved government, there's demand for housing for the staff who are probably working with the county governments. At the same time, when there is devolved of tertiary education, especially universities, you realize that nowadays in the countryside, a lot of universities are having satellite universities, which are essentially bringing in demand for students to be housed.
Yes.
Now, from a banking perspective, such areas represent an opportunity simply because there's demand. When there's demand, it simply means if you give out a facility, a credit facility for someone to do a real estate project, it simply means that you have a higher rate of return in terms of them paying back that credit facility. But on the flip side, when I look at agriculture, I feel that other inherent reasons have caused the shift from agricultural use of land to converting that to real estate projects. Case in point, the cost of doing farming, cost of farm inputs, cost of things like manure and other inputs in the farm are really high. And when that happens, sometimes for small-scale farmers, for large-scale farmers, they have the muscle to deal. Because at the same time, banks have a focus on agribusiness, and banks will be keen to fund or to assist or to give facilities to large-scale farmers. But for small-scale farmers, the costs related, the cost-efficient ratio simply doesn't make sense at the moment. If you look at the cost of your farm inputs versus what you're getting, and you realize for small-scale farmers, once the crop is ready for harvest, you have two options. Either you deal with the government through the National Cereals Board, or you probably deal with the private sector with the likes of Unga Limited and so on and so forth. So the juggling acting between has really squeezed the small-scale farmers, and that's why you will see some of these small-scale farmers feel that instead of me continuing with farming, I'd rather put up a residential structure for students, which makes more economic sense rather than me continuing on squeezing myself with high cost of inputs and essentially a value chain which is slowly being squeezing out the small scale and smallholder farmers. And then the other thing which we may need to look now from the general economic of things.
Yes.
You see, you've mentioned data, crucial data on how imports are coming in. You see, ordinarily the government will commission imports on commodities like sugar, like maize, like wheat, when there is a shortage. Now, when we are creating a shortage on ourselves by moving from agriculture to real estate, we're essentially pushing ourselves to a position whereby if you're shrinking the country's food basket, it simply means that the government will now find itself in a position whereby it will be commissioning imports. Now, when you're doing imports, economically speaking, you will be essentially tipping the balance of payments. You will essentially move more towards being a net importer, and that also has adverse effects on the country. So the variables which are involved are quite a few if you look at it from the grand scale of things, but at the same time, it's the reality on the ground.
Yes. All right, Chris, let me bring you in on that point which Arnold is just cleared on. I mean, when we look at wheat farming in the country, I mean, we've seen exactly what happens in the politics of maize in this country. We don't seem to have that going on in wheat farming in this country. It's as if, well, we're just okay with us importing it into the country. Can it be solved by saying, well, let's catch on the imports that will come into the country so we don't have farmers running away from it? We saw exactly what happened to tea and coffee farming in the country. Are we headed there? Because these specific counties are the bread when it comes to talking about wheat in the country.
Thank you, Elijah. And let me bring two aspects here.
Yes.
One is, when we talk about land, land is viewed as a factor of production. And a factor of production, of course, what it does is that it's a source of income.
Yes.
So it generates income. And so the reason why people hold on land is to be able to earn some income out of it. Now, if you look at the situation within the Western region and the areas that we are talking about and the wheat growing is not very complex, but is also not very easy. It requires a bit of mechanization.
Yes.
And this mechanization that it requires means that you cannot have small pieces of land on it. But if you look at the reality on the ground is that about 70% of our agriculture is smallholder farming. So, and that's smallholder farming actually, feeds about 75% of many of the households in Kenya. And so we are talking about people who have 0.2 to about 3 hectares of land. And so these people, this is not the case in the Western region in the past, but this is now slowly coming in. And again, if you also look at the growing of wheat, the complexity around it, I'm not an agricultural specialist, but I'm an economist. But if you look at it in the context of what it takes to grow wheat, it is a process. It requires a bit of input into that, and that input there is high cost of production. You see, one of the things that happens why we want to grow wheat, I want to grow wheat so that at the end of the day, unlike maize, it is not for subsistence. Most of the wheat people grow so that it's grown commercially, so then you can be able to earn income out of it. And so by the time somebody is venturing into wheat growing, he is focusing on earning income out of it. So some of the things that goes into it is looking at the cost of production. You look at the cost of production starting from the land that you have, the fertility levels, the acidity, you are looking at the kind of input, whether it is machinery, whether it is the seeds, whether it is the fertilizer and all that. So when you factor in that, then you realize at the end of the day, the cost of production is very high than the cost of sale, because at the time when you are selling it again, we really don't have very good mechanisms as a nation where now you can actually sell your wheat. And most of the time, we also don't have opportunities to also favor our farmers, protect our farmers. And you see, we are in a competitive world. So you will find certain countries, for example, about Uganda, Tanzania, with the very big arable land, they are able to grow this at a slightly cheaper cost. And so when now you start selling, then you find the price at which you want to sell your wheat is slightly higher. And so what happens? At that point now, people switch to other crops, those who want to do other crops. But unfortunately, because income here is the motive, somebody now talks about why not venture into real estate, something that is going to earn me more money. But also, the other aspect that we need to look at it is that for you to be able to grow wheat, you cannot grow wheat in small scale and expect to get huge returns. And so if you're going to grow wheat, the experience of those who grow wheat, even in areas like Kitale and Narok, is that you must be able to grow it in large scale. Now, the large scale works very well when land subdivision has not been done. Now, as people keep on growing and the land tenure system demands that, at certain age, the father subdivides land to his children. And so when we subdivide land to our children, and then we are a very democratic society, very democratic even at the family level, somebody will say that I have seen my father grow wheat for the longest time. He has not been making money out of it. So as now I've been given my own share of land, now what I need to do is that I now want to do my own thing. So now somebody will venture into some other thing, and now you end up growing wheat maybe in a very small portion. That does not help. But also, one other aspect that we must also be very careful about to mention is that we also have unbecoming habits of Kenyans, especially at certain times, we just make the growth of wheat very complicated and impossible to the extent that at the end of it, it is not very productive, or by the time you have your wheat, there is no market for it. And then at that time now, the supply, the demand is higher than the supply. And at that time now, the government has to come in and convene. How does the government convene? The government will not convene at the time when the demand is already high. The government will now come in at that time when demand is already high. There will be proposals of, now, can we be able to import some of the wheat so that we can be able to meet the demand that is there?
Yes.
But there are some business people who always are on the watch. You see, we also have the cyclical behavior of farming. So if this year I grow wheat and the climatic conditions, which is also another factor. Climatic conditions do not favor me this year, or for whatever reason, I don't get very high yields in terms of wheat, then you know the price of wheat this year will be high. For the following year, quite a number of people will be attracted to wheat and they will grow wheat. So if the harvest becomes better, then what will happen is that year, now the price of wheat will go down. So because of that kind of cyclical behavior and performance and the way production happens, then you also find after some time when we are experiencing challenges and then the emerging trends of commercialization, rental behavior and subdivision of land, then people now find that wheat is actually not profitable. So majority of the people now switch to other things, and then now we have imports. And I need to mention that these imports are not very good for us, because if you also look at economically, we are growing our GDP. We need to grow. Economic growth is a factor of quite a number of things. And if you look at the open trade, what we call the trade balance, it's about exports and imports. So if we are going to import more than we export, then we are going to have what we are calling the trade deficit. And once we have trade deficit, at the same time, we will also be experiencing challenges with our foreign exchange. So we are always at a better chance of being able to have more exports than imports. But it is even worse when you are importing food, because food is a basic need. Actually, in our constitution, it is very clear. I think Article 43 that talks about food being a basic right, and every child is entitled to adequate food. So when you are not able to grow it, then it also challenges the very freedom of having adequate food. And once that is there, then you can be able to expect a bit of demonstrations, a bit of political, struggles, and that is now when people now bring in imports. And when imports come, it completely destroys the common market. And what I see in the future, there is very likelihood of many people switching now to other crops and not wheat. Thank you.
Pretty much. Arnold, I would like you to be on standby because I would like us to take a short break. But once we come back, we would like to clear that conversation and introduce the other conversations that we have for you this morning on our economic review. Chris, I do know that you're quite busy this morning, so at this point I'll say goodbye and thank you very much for joining us this morning on our economic review, sir.
Thank you so much, Elijah, and I am happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Pretty much. We take that break. Once we come back, top on that, digital lenders outcry. What are they saying, and how are they going to position themselves in 2021?